So one of the things, teaching spatial sound. This particular paper, again, had a couple of motivations. First of all was to tell the story of teaching in the school. And part of the reason for wanting to do this is we're working on a teaching grant for next year, depending on what happens at the federal level with the Office of Learning and Teaching Fund grants in 2016, will be to look at how do we not only just take what we've done over the last 25, almost 30 years of teaching in the school, but then begin to form a network of people teaching sound in schools of design around Australia. As we know, the teaching landscape has profoundly shifted in the last couple of years, really not just from technology, but I believe also from things like attention as well. You've got a very different type of student coming through the door now than you did even 10 years ago, and the students will tell you that themselves. They know it's a very different environment. So, in doing this, what I had to do, of course, is go back and say, well, what has actually happened? It hasn't just been SIAL Sound Studios. Teaching in the school actually goes back to the early 90s. And, I had a brief stint around the mid-90s, and then went off for overseas travel, and people like Neil McLaughlin and Anton Hassel were here for a while, as well as being very much carried by people like Robin Lyons, Peter Clark, working in that particular area. But it's actually got a really long history. I'm going to go through some of that now. So this is a timeline. This is not everything on it. I've got a table I'll show you in a moment with that on it. But in going back over the history, and also spoke to Leon Van Skyke as well, just to particularly get his recollections of this period in the early to mid-90s. Mine is still okay, becoming hazier. And then SIAL Sound Studios started up between 2002 and 2004. But we really got three distinct periods. So at this point here, this is called the Australasian Soundscape Project. And this was really kicked along when Jonathan Mills was employed as a composer, in fact the Lady Beale Chair in the Acoustic Environment, in what was then called FEDC, the Faculty of Environmental Design and Construction. And Jonathan was employed as composer in residence, and he'd attended the 1993 Tuning of the World Conference in Banff, which was the big kickstart back to the World Soundscape Project and acoustic ecology from the 70s. Really from the 70s. And so this is sort of big arc from that early work in the 60s and 70s to that particular conference in 93. And then the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology started, and Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology, and the international network of organisations. So we were very much involved in that movement back in the early 90s. And then in around about 2000, there's a project called the Capitol Soundscape Project, and I was just trying to find that thick strategy document that we had. It's around. I haven't seen it since we moved. I might have it upstairs somewhere. But there was a 2-year project in here to look at the establishment of the Capitol Soundscape Centre, as it was called, in the Capitol Theatre that RMIT had purchased in the late 90s. And I write about this in the paper. And that was with Robin Oswald-Jacobs in the development office, and we were going to install a big sound system in there, and Tom Holman, as in Mr. THX, came out and looked at the logistical viability of the space, along with, I believe, Marshall Day Acoustics at that time, and a suite of studios, etc. So that one didn't quite come off, but we did get SIAL Sound Studios over in Building 9 when SIAL started up under Mark Burry. And then that marks this period then from the thousands onward. Another thing to note, just while we've got this timeline here, is that when I interviewed Leon about this, very much through here, this was about building things. That's what you did. You build things and make things. And we noticed in the, I took him this table, or the initial draft of this table. We're talking about, there's a lot of sort of construction going on. Of course, we realised rise of the digital. obviously computers are around at this point. Certainly in computer music, we were had very well established tools by this stage, but not in teaching and design, for teaching sound and design. So one of the first things to do, these tables came before the timeline. I've been doing the timeline from the tables. Was to go back and just to look at every year what the major studios were, and who was involved and what disciplines were involved. Because sound has been taught not just by people based in the studio, but other people like Ross McLeod, based over in interior design, Frank Feltham in industrial design, but often partnering up with staff or postgraduates from the studio, and on a really diverse range of topics and projects. So this is about the period when SIAL started up, and this is the point we were doing a lot of early work in games engines like string CVE and those sorts of things. We started the electives about 2005, I think, around there. Can you remember, when did you start? 204. Okay. And then there's been a number of papers come out. Let's quickly jump through this one. So, over 25 years, there's been about 27 people involved in teaching across the whole school. And actually go through and do a head count of who's been involved in teaching studios, specialist elective, the SIAL cross-university electives, and I haven't counted guests in there. It's even larger. So yeah, we can claim a substantial history in this area now. This is the beginnings of the bibliography. And then in terms of actually writing about, now obviously people have published a lot, but what I wanted to focus on were just the ones where people were publishing their approach to teaching and sound in the school, or where they've drawn on their teaching work to write about sound-based pedagogy. There's about 12 publications across 15 authors, and I know I still have to catch up with Jeff and Jordan and Frank about some of their publications within that. So some PhDs, peer reviews. I haven't at this point counted the non-peer review work, but probably get onto that. Here's one of the earliest ones. This is a paper by Robin Lyons and Neil McLaughlin. Came out in '97 in Acoustics Australia. Love the layout. I mean, it would look retro then as well. But I was like as well. Neil had well, in fact, we had email address at that point, but no websites necessarily on doing that. So when I interviewed Leon, he was talking about particularly the rise of the digital at that point, was that when that occurred in the early 90s, he made sure that in fact computers were distributed across the school in the early 90s. So even by the late 90s, yeah, there's still, obviously there were computers around, but I mean, I remember lectures were still being done on slides at that point. Everyone had walked around with carousels and things like that. So things have moved really, really quickly. But in this particular paper, Neil does talk about auralisation and setting up of the studio that was over in building 8, which is where the first studio was. And that was a system based on 8 control ones, which we still have, a PC running Cool Edit Pro, and a Lake DSP system. It was the first studio over there. So, current techniques. This is getting to the idea of this particular paper. So, Jordan, Jeff and I sat down earlier this year and did the classic whiteboard exercise and went through and just discussed and collated all the sorts of things we've done in classes, and just to give them 1, 2, 3 word titles, and to get a sense of where they fitted either within design studios, within the soundscape elective, within Jeff's elective on sound modelling, or the soundscape elective. So the crossing out years I've been working in Evernote and crossed them out as I've written about them, and if anybody knows how to get rid of crossing out in Evernote, that'd be good. So that's the pink lines. So we just wanted to get a sense of what are the different activities and approaches that we've that appear to be either unique or common in an approach, but to get the sense of a teaching repertoire, of a suite of techniques that we're deploying with design students. And this is also to think about the things like the OLTF grant, on how we might begin to think about these as a suite of techniques that could be developed further, particularly with other design schools. So here they are. It's an image of Nigel Frayne there on the right-hand side, who was one of our guests for a project called Auditory City with the City of Melbourne, and that was a series of industry workshops around about 2007. So from that list, we had all these ones. I'm not going to talk about them all today, but I'll just step through a couple of them. So with recording, this is this image which I used in my PhD, so I've left this. I need to update it with a few more devices these days. Of course, we now, particularly with the undergrads, use the Zoom recorders a lot. But as many of you know, in general, we make students do all their own recording. We don't allow them to download sound off the web. They have to identify sites, visit them, record them, document them in other ways, maybe images or sketches, and then use those sounds in their projects, whether it's a walkthrough, a simple 2-channel playback, or some kind of multi-channel composition. And we've done that as a way of getting them to engage more deeply with aspects of the acoustic environment. We did actually break that rule for the Museum of Sound Masters Studio earlier this year, and that's because we have an extraordinary range of students, range as in where they're from around the world. And the brief for that particular studio was that they were to construct an exhibition that either told us something about sound or had sound as a way of communicating the primary idea behind the exhibition. And of course we had students, one student wanted to do an exhibition about talking drums. Now the opportunity to record talking drums in Melbourne is very small, if not non-existent. So, and once the project ideas started coming through, we said, all right, no, you can download sound from the internet for this particular project because they were going to have better projects anyway. So we did that. Sound walks. This is from Jordan's class one year. The instructions that we use for that one. So again, you've got to remember these students, particularly the design students, very visually astute and aware. Not so for sound necessarily. And so the sound walk technique from is developed by the World Soundscape Project is an ideal introduction for them. And often it's the first time they've actually walked without speaking or looking at a phone for 20 minutes. Some of them absolutely love it. It just profoundly opens their ears. It actually does have that effect. It does sound like a cliche, but it actually does work. Others can't do it. If I know where we've paired up and we've had a lecture at front and someone else behind, you invariably see the stragglers at some point on the phone or talk. They actually can't. They find it very difficult to do. But there's often a reflective component that they then have to come back and write up about the sound walk. Activist approaches. These are images from the first shutdown project, and then Jordan ran one in 2012, I think. A bit later maybe, 2012. This is the first one in about 2004. And for this one, we worked on Bowen Street through the middle of the university and got property services to shut down on a Saturday morning as many of the pieces of plant and equipment as they could across the buildings all along one side of the university. So this included air conditioners, chemical extraction fans, and the fans in server rooms. So there's quite an ensemble of whirring fans through there if you do go through. We also then got the students to record and also take some sound measurements and quickly just ask questions of the general public as they were walking through. And what people did notice was that, and in fact was measurable, was that the dB level didn't drop very much, but people did notice a change in the acoustic conditions. And say, it just feels a bit different, or it's a bit more relaxed here today. That constant sort of agitated, low frequency rumble, or the sludge, as I tend to call it. And I've always been really interested in this zone within the university. It is in the heart of the university. It's the absolute middle of the city campus. And being an international university, I'm not sure of how many language groups we have, but I'd think certainly a number into the 20s and 30s. And so this should really be like a dynamic space of voices and habitation, and it just doesn't always carry that off very well because there's so many of these noise sources. So that's the idea of the activist approach, that we actually enact change on a soundscape. Another one we've introduced more recently is what we call the impulse response exercise. And for this one, we work with a long space, like we have in the Design Hub, and Zoom recorders and a balloon. And we get students to basically position the microphones down very long space to then do the balloon pop and measure the time difference between the microphone placement and so they get a sense of basically how sound is travelling down a space. And we use the Design Hub for this because it's got a fantastic slap echo. The other one, I've got another field exercise here. This is the tempo exercise which we developed for the PolyQuarters Master Studio. In this studio in 2014, students had to construct a 12-minute sonic experience of an urban quarter. But they had to use 3 forms of representation in parallel. They had to do a line score diagram, a repertoire with audio in it, and a section diagram. And they had to align. So they needed some way of being able to measure out certainly time, and to get a sense of if I have to construct a 12-minute experience with someone walking slowly, how far is that? And so one thing we got them to do was to download metronomes onto their phones, and then to work out what was the slowest tempo they could comfortably walk at, without feeling awkward or drawing attention to themselves, and then what was the fastest time. We got them to do this around the Design Hub as well. So they could get tempo markings, basically, and begin to understand what that might mean, and then to calculate how far they would walk at this tempo, hence how much time they needed and sounds they needed to then distribute to create their 12-minute, somewhat arbitrary duration, but 12 minutes in, say, electroacoustic compositions, a sort of middle zone piece, if you like. Notation, again, sound maps and sight mapping. We've used this extensively with sound walks for many, many years. This is one of Murray Schafer's sketches. I haven't scanned any of the recent sound maps for the students. We tend to use an A4 sheet, putting the students in the middle, and looks more like a kind of a, not so pictorial, the ones that our students end up with. But yeah, we do have the sound mapping technique. What we do with the students, though, is once they've noted down sounds with times on them, is then we get them to do 3 things with it. They then have to, they have the map, that's the first thing. Then we get them to convert everything they've heard in an environment into a list. And the third thing we do then is to unravel the time points they've noted down into a timeline. And we do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not to record an accurate record of a sound environment. There's other ways of doing that one. It's to actually record what comes into awareness or the student's attention whilst they're sitting in that environment. And also a way they can actually walk away and discuss it with other students or in class. So they've got a record of that. If you get them to record that, they'll put the recording on and stop listening. So it's low-tech, high-concept. And when we were teaching the games studios a number of years ago, we found that if we got them to list the sounds that they've recorded on their sound map and do the timing, they then also got a sense of the kind of how they might lay up sounds in their project. So they got a sense of the temporal flow of a space, but they also knew what they'd have to record. Like, can you represent a cafe over in Building 8 with how many sounds? Do you need 2? Do you need 12? Can you get away with 8? So again, it just gets them to think about what is the material of a particular soundscape. And we've also timed the duration of this one as well. students usually start off, the first one they do is 10 minutes. Oh, that was pretty easy. The last one's anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. They have to sit and do the math. And that can be extremely, it is challenging for them in terms of having to sit there for that period of time. In terms of theory, because there's been an enormous explosion these days in theory from sound art, sound culture, sonic archaeology, sound studies, historical soundscape research, but we still very much draw on the work of Cresson, and it's a list of some of their sonic effects here, and also the work of the World Soundscape Project. And the annotated bibliography is often drawn from the work of Cresson and the World Soundscape Project. Spatial sound examples. Again, we've got a number of repositories that we draw on now for that one. We've got the RMIT Sonic Arts collection with 23 works in it. Another range of about 40 works that we've used from the concert series over the years. And then also recordings that we've made from projects with industry partners, so chamber-made opera, Speak Percussion, Illusion Ensemble. And I know when we've had guest lectures, and I say from Jim, we've also had the benefit of his recordings and compilations made from Central Australia and all around the country. And then also there's about 15 staff works, I think, on our hard disk archive at the moment. And that's very much, we use these, it's a real case of what we call teaching with music. Although I've called them spatial sound examples, could be just as equal as spatial music examples. But also on the premise that the most advanced forms of auditory, so that's the floor above, they're doing an install, I think. The most advanced form of auditory spatial organisation, or sound organisation, I believe, is still within electroacoustic music. And so that's why we have the studio. That's one of the reasons we've maintained a working studio over the last 12, 13 years as well. Another approach we've used too is the brief or problem making. We teach very much through in design studios, which is it's a great format to teach in, particularly if you come from music and you're not used to it, where the curriculum would be constructed from set topics all the way through. But teaching through studios means that you can essentially curate a problem every semester. And so you're never teaching the same thing twice. If you have a look on Ross McLeod's website, he's got this enormous list of design studios he's taught over the years. It's fantastic. So these images are from the Soundbite City exhibition. And Nick Williams, who we collaborated with on the design of the Taurus, so this is Nick Williams and John Cherry's Taurus, and they worked with a group of architecture elective students to construct this. So we took a real-world exhibition we're having with RMIT Art Gallery, and then the students, as their elective topic, had to construct the Taurus. Concerts and installation. I spoke earlier about the Taurus, but we've also worked where we've had concert series and to get students to come and do some kind of documentation of that. That was in World Lines earlier this year. And Jeff and I have also been talking about ways that we can integrate the SCAD elective, the spatial sound and composition and diffusion elective, more closely with the concert series, so that the elective kind of wraps around the concert series. So students can come in, they get trained up, and then they can come and work on in-house events. So for the sake of completeness, I'll play a short video. And of course, while the exhibition was on, we took the opportunity to take students through it and discuss more about the process of how we put it together, so they could see very much from the inside how a show like that came about. One of the other ones we've introduced over the years is spatial mixing techniques. So again, students are actually working with sound as part of their education. And this is one of the ones we do with the soundscape students, the spatial sound composition students, where they take a bellbird recording that we made a number of years ago near Yarra Bend, near Ivanhoe, and we give them a mono file and instructions on how to build that mono file back up into spatial sound walkthrough of a bellbird colony. So if you're not used to a bellbird colony, it's a very short, sharp tone that the birds make. It's sort of beep, and of course they're territorial and they're spread around. So as you walk through a colony, it's this fantastic counterpoint spatial composition that you get. So we play them that recording, then we give them a mono file and say, "No, you make one." We have the benefit of the ambisonic recording we made, and that's part of the instruction set we give them down the bottom. Then just on to two final ones here. The use of games engines. We haven't done that for a little while, but yeah, certainly in the early thousands we were working with, as I said, string CVE, and that came to us through collaboration with Jules Maloney. He's now based at Deakin. And then students from that then came and worked with us on 2 contracts for City of Melbourne. Jeff Hannam's Nebula Program that he's developed over the last couple of years as well is a way that students can model sound and walkthroughs, again in a 3D environment. The last one I'll just also mention in terms of site visits. Always important, I think, to get out of the space that we're teaching in all the time, and we use site visits around Melbourne as exemplars, but also for a much stronger experiential component. So this was students visiting during the Museum of Sound, visiting the Melbourne Museum, and what we did for this was to set up a day of visits to a number of exhibition sites that use sound or about music. So in addition to the Melbourne Museum, we also went to the Percy Granger Museum at Melbourne Uni. And they're standing in front of, in this short video you'll see, is a device called the Symphonium, which dates from the 1880s. And it was, as it's described on their website, that it once rung out in Cole's Book Arcade, one of the wonders of marvellous Melbourne. It was a shop like no other, crammed with new and second-hand books and other wares, but with the atmosphere of a circus. Proprietor Edward William Cole was a brilliant publicist and idealist, enticing customers of all ages with caged monkeys, an aviary, a fernery and a live band. I just don't think consumerism cuts it these days, after all. Quite different from online shopping. Readers could sit in comfortable chairs, encouraged by a sign that said, "Read for as long as you like, nobody asked to buy." And what you could hear if you went there was this. So a very wide range of technology we expose them to. So that's from Melbourne Museum. On the left is the Bandura soundscape system, a multi-channel soundscape system installed at RMIT's campus in Bandura. And then on the right-hand side, the Federation Bell. So again, we take them out to places that is what Leon Van Skyke calls they're permanent. You can go back and experience them. They don't actually have the ephemerality that most sound events do. But can be experienced on more than one occasion. And then just finally also on the idea of the site visit as well. On the left-hand side, this is some testing we did prior to our concert series at the Recital Centre in Melbourne. So we encourage the students to go to concerts and events in exemplary acoustics, in this case the Recital Centre. It could also be the Arts Centre. And then we might even organise some kind of tour to go and look at acoustic design features within these spaces. So in this particular space, highly diffusing wall, but also they have panels that drop down for sound absorption that come down from the ceiling. Or if we're talking about amphitheatres and things like that, possibly back in ancient Rome or theatre design, we can send them off to Fairfield Boathouse, which is on the right, and they can go and play and experience an amphitheatre in their local environment. Okay, so this paper's in getting toward final draft, and what are some of the things that we're starting to notice? Well, a very, very wide range of practitioners have been involved. Long history, about 25 years of teaching within the school. It's predominantly been taught by designers and artists, composers, people tending from a humanities background, but with good technical knowledge. And we have teamed up with acousticians and engineers for specialist knowledge along the way. So that means that we've had topics around, very much around the experiential aspects of sound, through to the effective nature of soundscapes as well. But in general, within design school, sound programs are still relatively small. What are some of the things we need to work on? I don't want to paint an entirely rosy picture because there's always things that you can improve on. And I think one of them is certainly evaluation. What knowledge do students apply in practice? For the most part, from our student and course evaluation surveys, they find the courses very interesting. What we actually don't know is then what difference does it make when they go out into practice? And I'd certainly like to know more about that one. I think we need to build more on the experiential components, and that's what we're looking to do with some of the research grants. And again, that's also been very much a reaction to web-based programs. I mean, as our Vice-Chancellor commented recently, you could have the answer to the world's questions in your pocket. What do you do if you come into university? And for us, where making is important, certainly within research and teaching, we're keen to look at the sorts of things that students can pursue individual background reading, viewing videos, etc. But when they come into the building, it's very much about experiential components, exercises in making and doing. The final one, as I mentioned earlier, looking at the formation of a network of schools and program around this area. So at this stage, we've got about 5 other design programs involved in looking at a teaching resource, and we'll be looking more into that in 2016.